Most overpaid player in the NBA. As big-name performers in front of an audience of millions of fans, NBA players make quite a bit of money. In fact, some of the most contested predictions every year are about where each player will end up and which team will pay the most for superstars. But not every player performs well enough to justify the cost. In this video, we'll look at some of the players that might be the most overpaid in the NBA. Blake Griffin. Blake Griffin is midway through a 5-year contract worth $171 million in total, but it's debatable whether his play on the court has justified the big cost for the Pistons. The Blake Griffin we saw during the 2019-2020 season before it was suspended just isn't the same as the one we saw with the LA Clippers. In fact, the Clippers look like a smart team now for letting Griffin walk away. They advanced to the conference semifinals in the playoffs, while the Pistons are stuck where they are after Griffin dropped to 4.7 rebounds per game in 2019. That's the lowest average rebounds he's ever had during his career. His points per game took a hit too, falling from 24 points per game to 15 points per game in less than a year. The Pistons definitely aren't getting what they thought they were paying for when they signed Griffin, but they're stuck with him now as his deal was set to last 5 years. It's also a big enough deal to complicate finding a trade partner if the Pistons decide they want to pull the plug and head back to the rebuilding block to find a younger star to build around. Earlier in his career, Griffin had gained a reputation for acting in funny commercials for Kia. But if you're a Pistons fan, you're probably not laughing now about his drop-off in performance in 2019 and his general decline in his peak years. After all, he has by far the highest cap hit on the Pistons and also holds the highest cap hit of any power forward in the NBA. Chandler Parsons. While Chandler Parsons isn't an active player in the NBA right now, he was definitely one of the most overpaid players during the 2019-2020 season. He was signed to the Atlanta Hawks going into the start of the season, but better days were already behind him even before his performance dropped off further during the last couple of seasons. When the Hawks signed Parsons in July 2019, they were betting on getting the kind of performances he put on with the Houston Rockets during the first phase of his career, or at least getting a decent role player like Parsons had been for subsequent teams. The Hawks were unlucky enough to get neither, and Parsons only played in 5 games where he struggled before he was injured off the court in a life-threatening car accident. His deal with the Hawks was worth $25 million, but during the 5 games he played in before his injury, he was only able to rack up 2.8 points per game and 1.4 rebounds per game. Career low numbers for a player that had been a relevant factor on the Rockets and the Mavericks earlier in his career. Parsons may have held some hope of coming back to basketball, but the injury sustained in the car crash was too big for a player of his age to come back from. Parsons is 31 after all, and the fall-off in his performance in the later years of his career sealed his fate as a player that would be out of the league following his injury. He was waived by the Hawks in 2020, and it doesn't look like he'll jump back into the league with another team. Andrew Wiggins. Coming out of college, Andrew Wiggins was highly touted and was one of the many players to, rightfully or not, get LeBron James comparisons. However, it turns out Wiggins wasn't the right man for Minnesota, and his production has fallen off slightly in the few games he played for Golden State since his move to the Warriors. He's played in 12 games so far with Golden State, and his 19 points per game with the team would be fine if it wasn't for his 5-year, $147 million contract, of which he's in the second year of. It's safe to say fans will expect better performances, especially when the Warriors are set to spend big on him in the long term because of his 5-year contract. After all, the Warriors have a limited window to try and get back into contention in the Western Conference, and any money they spend on Wiggins is money not spent on other stars. That goes for both retaining existing players that were around for the dynasty years of the Warriors and adding new talent to the team in free agency. Nicholas Batum. Nicholas Batum is definitely one of the big contenders for the title of most overpaid player in the NBA. While the small forward and shooting guard has had better days in the past, those days seem like they were a long time ago by now. But the Hornets thought they were getting a better version of Batum when they agreed to terms with him for a $120 million deal. 2019 was the 4th year of his deal, and by now, Batum has dropped off hard. Because of this drop-off, it's unlikely the Hornets will be able to find another team that will take on Batum's contract. Batum played in 22 games before the 2019 season was suspended, and the Hornets didn't make it into the playoffs. His points per game fell from a low 9.3 to an even lower 3.6. With the rest of his stats having gone down also, the Hornets are getting the worst performances of Batum's career, but are left with little option other than toughing it out and waiting for Batum to retire,